Hello, and welcome to the last webinar of 2025 for our Community of Practice Lunch and Learn series. This particular community of practice is a collective of individuals across northern BC who want to make restoration more effective. We're guided by an organizing team with core members from CERN BC, the Habitat Conservation Trust Foundation, Fish and Wildlife Compensation Program, and the BC Wildlife Federation. We've got some nascent regional teams and subject matter working groups. We just wrapped a Northern BC workshop that Katelyn and I both attended, and we've got some smaller regional workshops coming in the new year. So what we're trying to do with this community of practice is break down silos while sharing leading practices. The vast geography of Northern BC and winter conditions a lot of us are experiencing right now are two of the things that isolate this community of practice. So I'm super stoked to get to organize and host webinars like this one. Today's talk is being recorded, but I will stop the recording for our Q&A at the end to ensure a candid and fulsome discussion. So at that time, you can use the chat feature or the hand up feature to ask questions as you prefer. And now we've got Katelyn White, a biologist working for the BC Energy Regulator, who's going to walk us through the Ecologically Suitable Species Guideline, or ESSG for short. This is a new guideline that aims to improve restoration of energy activities on Crown lands. So over to Katelyn to hear how that all works.
I'm trying my hand at Zoom. So thank you so much, May. Apologies if there anything is clunky. I'm definitely more of a mud and sticks girl and less of a techie girly. So apologies for anything. Hopefully with all of your expertise, if anything goes wrong, you'll be able to pull me out of the weeds. So thank you so much for having me. The room continues to grow, and I'm quite shocked. I didn't know that there would be this much interest at the end of the year in the Ecological Suitable Species Guideline. But thank you so much for taking time out of your day to come and chat. So I just have 15 slides, a quick little deck that's basically the too long did not read of the Ecological Suitable Species Guideline. Just to kind of go through kind of why we developed it, what its key points are, what our goals are with it. And then hopefully we'll have lots of time for questions if anybody has any questions about anything. So I will get right into it. So, the Ecological Suitable Species Guideline was published in 2023, but its development started many years before. 2019, I think, was, or 2018, 2019 were some of the first meetings that were held around restoration and what restoration should look like within the focus was on the Northeast because predominantly that is where a lot of, well, the lion's share of the oil and gas activity that we regulate was taking place. And so there was a lot of concerns that were brought forth from First Nations communities about the quality of the restoration that was happening on the landscape when it came to oil and gas activities. And everyone was kind of wondering what the issue, how, identifying what the issue is, and then how we can move forward. And so from those series of meetings, a contractor was hired. There were some drafts and lots of work back and forth that predate me in the organization. And then I was hired I joined the BCER in 2020, and then in 2023, one of my first tasks as the biologist in the biologist role was to put out the Ecological Suitable Species Guideline and implement it. So that's what I've been really, a lot of my work has been ever since, is just trying to bring this into being and implement it on the landscape. So the purpose is really to improve the restoration by that we are seeing on the landscape to establish ecologically suitable species and make sure that we're hitting appropriate ecological trajectories on our restoration sites that are under our purview. So we wanted to develop clear short-term objectives to increase the likelihood of achieving those longer-term objectives of what people were looking for when it came to restoration. And because in order for things to be really effective, the best thing to do is to link them to regulation. And so the guideline was called the Ecologically Suitable Species Guideline because that term was specifically used in our regulation, Section 19. And so this is us clarifying that terminology. So here is that section that we're referring to. So we have the Environmental Protection and Management Regulation, which was given to us by the ministry. Section 19 talks about areas to be restored, and it applies to all of the activities that we regulate. And it says, and I've done little clips of it, so I've given you section 1, subsection D, because that's explicitly where the Ecological Suitable Species Guideline is tying into. So that says a person who carries out an oil and gas activity on an operating area and who no longer intends to do so must, as soon as practicable, restore the operating area by doing the following. And then there's a couple other points. And D, revegetate any exposed soil on the operating area using seed or vegetative propagules of an ecologically suitable species that promote the restoration of wildlife habitat that existed in the area before the oil and gas activity was begun and stabilize the soil if highly susceptible to erosion. And so a couple really important points in this. Again, we are focusing on that ecological suitable species because originally people were like, what does that mean? And we had the historical interpretation, because we didn't give any guidance on that, was that any stage in succession was fine. And so grasses are the first stage of succession, and grass seeding was fine. Because that is ecologically suitable at a beginning stage of the ecology of an area, and eventually everything will fill in. But we weren't really seeing that. We have these sites, some sites that are, 30 years old, and they're still meadows in the middle of forests because just the ecology of the area, things are not filling in as we kind of thought that they might back 30 years ago when that practice was really going. And then the second point I want to point out is to promote the restoration of wildlife habitat that existed on the area before oil and gas activity has begun, and to stabilize the soil if susceptible to erosion. So the wildlife habitat is really the goal that we're going to this. And so for those reasons, the Ecological Suitable Species Guideline, it applies to crown land that is outside of the agricultural land reserve. And the goal is to put it back to wildlife habitat. So the ESSG is a big document. I sent a link to May, but it's available on our website, or if you have any issues with it, feel free to contact me if you can't get a copy of it. But it has some main components. So it defines the scope of where it applies. It gives some key reclamation considerations and what we're looking for. It also has a performance assessment and reporting section, and then it does rely on adaptive management. And so I'm going to talk about each of those in the slides going forward. So application scope, again, it applies to forested crown land. And it applies to the things that we are authorizing within permits. So well sites, facility sites, decking sites, access roads, remote sumps, all if they're on forested crown land outside of the ALR, ESSG applies. I do want to really stress that Schedule B requirements remain in effect for sites that are located on agricultural land reserve lands. So that's a lot of a lot of the main questions that I get are like, well, what about the ALR and agronomics and agriculture? And those are important, and they are. The ESSG has nothing to do with those. That ALC requirements within the ALR and the Schedule A, Schedule B still remains in place. That is unchanged with this guideline. This guideline talks about all of those other areas that up until the guideline did not have any specific guidance on what was expected other than make it green. Pre-engagement is a new part that we're adding into the restoration because we do feel, based on those conversations that we had in creating this guideline, was something that was missing and could be valuable to practitioners, and of course to the people who are using the land afterwards. So it aims to align ecological restoration objectives with cultural interests and promote the conservation and protection of treaty rights. This is where Indigenous knowledge, historic uses, anything, site-specific considerations from the nations that have territory overlapping the areas to be restored should be collected and considered within those restoration planning. And it is expected that in the revised core Part 2 application, the permit holder will need to supply the following engagement information. So that's whether local Indigenous knowledge was invited. So did you ask? Did you approach the nations regarding the site level reclamation? And if it was provided, how was that incorporated into the project? And we're also looking for records for each affected First Nation that was engaged, outlining any objections or concerns that were raised during that process as well. So that is a log, a record to be submitted along with the assessment when you do your core Part 2s on ESSG sites. So what sites does ESSG apply to? Is that everything? And the answer is no. We had to pick a date and a time for us to start this, and it's not really fair to ask people to replant sites that they've planted and they've been, managing for 5 years or so, trying to get it to that site. So we made 3 different kind of classes of authorized sites in regards to reclamation. So historically reclaimed sites are any site that was reclaimed prior to 2024. These sites are not expected to hit the metrics within the ESSG because the ESSG came out in mid 2023, and so there's no expectation for you to go and revise and rework sites that you had planted the years previous to even knowing that we were putting this out. We also have transitory sites. So those are the sites that were completed in 2023. So after the work had gone out, these are not going to be evaluated strictly against the ESSG criteria, but we're asking for companies and proponents to use those sites as a bit of a practice or a training. So to practice their assessments and practice, gathering kind of what information they can to kind of get a feel, and hopefully if there was any issues, raise questions then with myself so that we can get that sorted out, and implementation on the sites where we do actually really need it goes a lot more smoothly. And so any site that was planted January 1st, 2024 and beyond and forward into the future fully has to comply with the ESSG and what it is that we're looking for. So those here we have prior to January 1st, 2023. Those are our historical sites where you're not expected to work within the guidance. The transitory year, January 1st to December 31st of 2023. Do the best you can, keep those on file for yourself. It's a practice year for you to kind of read the guideline and see what it might look like. And then anything January, so 2024 and onwards has to do your engagement, keep a record of that, do a pre-reclamation assessment, do your performance assessment once you've reached, you believe you've reached the metrics, and then you will be asked for spatial data when you submit your certificate of restoration. Part 2. So that's great. We have a new standard. And we're asking for all these things, but we still haven't talked about what ecological suitable species is. So what is that? And so ecologically suitable species are they're native plants, basically. So they're locally common trees, shrubs, forbs, and grasses that would naturally be occurring in the surrounding landscapes or would have been on site before any disturbance or restoration would have happened. Unacceptable species, no change. Noxious weeds and invasive plants are not accepted on the site. And then we have this third category where we've called them problematic species. And those are our agronomic grasses and our sod-forming grasses. And those problematics are what historically had been used predominantly in oil and gas reclamation. And because of their nature, really prohibited a lot of ingress of native plants onto the sites because of those, sod forming. They're built for agriculture, right? So they're meant to be high performers, and they're also meant to have a lot of tending and human handling in agricultural practices. And so when you leave them on the landscape, they tend to go a little crazy and outcompete the natural and native plants, which really reduces their ability to come into those sites. And that's why we were seeing a lot of these sites that were restored, as in they were green and plants were growing on them, but they weren't really meeting the expectations and the requirements of being habitat for wildlife because they're mostly agronomics. So we are pointing towards to identify species where we have a small appendix species list that was created in some of those original meetings. And I'm working now to do some updates to that because it's not at all, even with the updates, it will not be a complete list, but it'll be a place to get you started if you're looking for some inspiration on what could be available on your sites. And there's also some other handbooks and information available, and really what is around you is always, and around your site is always a good place to get started as well. So in order for a site to be considered ecologically suitable under the guideline, species must be ecologically suitable species. So those native plants, those locally common shrubs, trees, forbs, and grasses are expected to predominate and persist. And therefore, unacceptable species must be absent and problematic species must not hinder suitable species growth. Because these guys are prolific, right? So these are kind of the troublemakers that we see on sites, especially this yellow sweet clover, which has just it seeds so prolifically, and it gets really woody when it's allowed to grow up. Understand that, it's a nitrogen fixer, so a lot of people thought they were doing really good, but it kind of just takes over, and it is really woody. So once it becomes more mature, it's not really palatable. And they are already in the soil, right? So they're already out there in a lot of these sites because ground cover seeding was done on topsoil piles to prevent erosion. And so they're out there, they're on your sites, and they're going to have to contend with them while you're trying to establish those ecologically suitable species. And that's why we say they're not expected to persist. So you need to get to the site to a place where yes, you will still probably have some as like, or some red or white clovers. You're probably going to have some, agronomic grasses that are going to be mixed in, but it's expected that you have enough diversity on the site that your native plants are healthy, and that they will eventually shade out those meadow loving agronomics further on if, given the time. So I do recognize it as a struggle and it will not be perfect for a bit, but because of historic practices, but we're hoping that eventually we'll get over, get through the messy period. So performance metrics, how do we know that we've done a good job? The performance metrics are not meant to be like groundbreaking. They're meant to be usable, and they're meant to be kind of easily identified by practitioners who are working in the space. They are loosely based on a Schedule B assessment. So if you've been using those in industry for a long time, this should look familiar to you. We've just made some adjustments to that based on comments that were given from the scientific community, First Nations, and industry and practitioners. So we do have a mandatory within. We're looking for you to have at least 2 growing seasons under your belt on the restored site before you do an evaluation for your certificate of restoration part 2 application. And that just makes sure that things are actually able to have some time to well establish. That is your minimum. That is not your maximum. You can take 15 years if that's what you need, and you can take more because by this point in time, your DSR requirements, dormancy and shutdown regulation requirements have been met. And so you're just waiting for that certificate of restoration. And that allows you to manage for your persistent agronomics on your site as well. So all of these things should look pretty familiar. If you are comfortable with Schedule B, so landscape form and function, some information about the soil, and vegetation. And where we differ in this is that there are specific criteria that are pointed towards plant community composition. So in our ESSG assessments, we are looking for the species and percent cover and distribution of those species within the plots. The target is an average of 80% cover across all plots, with each plot having at least 60% plant cover. And at least 2 desirable ecological suitable species. So we're not looking for a monoculture. We also have a really low requirement for stalking density for woody stems. And that is because our goal is not forestry. So I've had a lot of comments from foresters saying this is too skinny, and it might be. But for right now, we would just like to see how this goes and assess part of the adaptive management approach to it. And we are requiring a professional declaration. So it has to be overseen and signed off by a certified reclamation specialist within the field. So RP Bio, PEGs are generally the people that do this kind of work. But other people, if that's your area of practice, like a forester. We also have requirements around plots. So this is, we're looking for the area to be gridded out into 30 meter by 30 meter plots. And then the amount of plots that you're needed is depending on your site. So you're going to need a minimum of 3 with a control, a separate control plot. And that is if your site is pretty homogeneous. If you have a really diverse site with, a little lowland area and a bit of upland and more complex, then you're going to be needing to do more test plots within your site. We're really just looking for you to tell that story of what your plant communities are and how you've restored the area. And then as you scale up in the amount of plots needed to tell your story, representative of your site, then your control plots must be 20% of that number. There is a lot more additional information on that within the document. And if you're really worried about or interested in the nuts and bolts of that, I suggest you take a read through it. And I am very available if you have any questions and wanted to touch base on that later. So within I guess I should say, for people who are like, wow, 30 meter by 30 meter, those are the grid we're asking you to put over. And then the plot that you're using inside is more akin to your standard like forestry plot. I think it's like 1.3 something meters that you would generally use when doing that. So that's the plot that we're looking for as a test within at least 3 of those 30 by 30 meter on your site. And if I explain that poorly, I apologize. You can call me out on it in the questions. And then the whole idea is that we understand that this is new. We understand that restoration, specifically ecological native species, restoration is an area of ongoing work and research, that it is not a perfectly known area. And so the ESSG document is intended to be revised and continually updated in response to what we're seeing on the landscape and in the assessments. So we are waiting right now because ESSG was put into place. We saw earlier any site planted January 1st, 2024 and forward, and then we need 2 growing seasons. So really the end of next year, 2026, is the first opportunity that we would have for sites that were planted in that early kind of spring of 2024. And so we have an audit planned that would come into effect as soon as we've reached a good sample size of assessments. So I haven't had anything submitted to me yet, which is perfect. That's exactly what we had planned. And then once we get a good sample size of assessments, then we'll be doing an audit on them. And we'll be continually doing audits on, results and what we're seeing to identify any gaps, and speaking with people and how it went to try and keep it up to date. So everything is not it's a moving target, and we understand that, and we're always looking for ways to make it better, but we will be doing those changes in a thoughtful and rigorous manner, because I don't want to do any kind of knee-jerk responses if we don't have to. And I spoke really, really quickly, but I'm most interested in speaking with you guys. So I apologize if I was a little too quick, but I would love to hear from you, and if you had any questions about what it is we're trying to do.
Thanks, Caitlin. I will stop my recording here so that we can have a fulsome conversation.